Evening, friend. Name's Arthur Morgan. I reckon you found your way to my journal somehow, and I'm glad for the company. Out here in the wild, when the day's work is done and the camp's settling down for the night, I like to put my thoughts to paper. Simple moments mostly, the kind that remind a man what's worth remembering. So settle in comfortable like. Let the sounds of the wilderness carry you away from whatever troubles might be weighing on your mind. Tonight, I'll share some stories from my time out here. Quiet moments when the world showed me its gentler side. Stories best told by firelight, when the stars are bright and the night is peaceful. Close your eyes now, and let me take you back to those days when life moved slower, when a man could still find peace in the simple act of watching a sunrise or listening to the rain fall gentle on canvas and leaves. Let me tell you about a morning that started before dawn. The gentle morning at Horseshoe Overlook. Well, I reckon I ought to write about this morning while it's still fresh in my mind. Sometimes the simplest moments stick with you longer than all the excitement and trouble we usually find ourselves in. I woke up before dawn today, like I often do. Camp was still quiet, save for the gentle snoring coming from Uncle's tent and the soft crackling of what remained of last night's fire. There's something peaceful about those early hours, when the world feels like it belongs just to you and the creatures that call the wilderness home. I pulled on my boots and stepped outside my tent, breathing in that cool morning air. The smell of dew on grass mixed with the faint scent of wood smoke created something that just, well, it made me feel at peace. Above me, the sky was painted in shades of deep purple and soft pink, with the first hints of orange creeping over the horizon. Stars were still visible, though they were starting to fade as the sun prepared to make its grand entrance. My horse, my faithful girl, was grazing nearby. She lifted her head when she saw me approach, and I swear I could see contentment in her eyes. I gave her a gentle pat on the neck, running my fingers through her mane. There's something honest about horses, you know. They don't lie, they don't scheme, they don't pretend to be something they ain't. They just are. And in a world full of complicated people with complicated motives, that simplicity is a gift. I decided to take a walk down toward the stream that runs below our camp. The path was soft under my feet, covered in fallen leaves that had turned golden and red with the changing season. Each step made a gentle rustling sound, like nature's own quiet applause for the new day beginning. As I made my way down the gentle slope, I noticed how the morning light was starting to filter through the trees. It created these beautiful patterns on the ground, shifting and dancing as the leaves moved in the slight breeze. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the melodic song of a meadowlark, its voice clear and sweet in the crisp air. When I reached the stream, I knelt down by the water's edge. The stream was moving slowly, creating a soft babbling sound that was almost like a lullaby. The water was so clear I could see smooth stones on the bottom, worn smooth by countless years of gentle current. I cupped some of the cool water in my hands and splashed it on my face, feeling instantly more awake and alive. That's when I noticed her, a doe, standing on the opposite bank of the stream. She was drinking delicately, her ears twitching occasionally to listen for any potential danger. But she seemed calm, unhurried. We looked at each other across that little stream, two creatures sharing the same moment in time. I stayed perfectly still, not wanting to frighten her away. The doe had the most beautiful coat, a rich brown color that seemed to glow in the morning light. Her eyes were large and gentle, and there was a wisdom in them that made me think about how much these wild animals see and understand that we humans never even consider. She finished drinking and looked at me one more time, as if nodding a greeting, before turning and gracefully bounding back into the forest. I sat there by the stream for a while longer, just listening to the water and watching the light grow stronger. A family of rabbits emerged from some nearby bushes, hopping about and nibbling on the tender grass. They seemed completely at ease, going about their morning routine without a care in the world. One of the smaller rabbits, probably just a kit, seemed particularly playful, hopping in small circles and chasing its own shadow. As the sun climbed higher, I started to hear the first sounds of camp stirring to life. Miss Grimshaw's voice carried on the breeze, though I couldn't make out the words. Someone was stirring the fire back to life, and I could smell coffee beginning to brew. My stomach reminded me that breakfast would be welcome, but I wasn't quite ready to leave this peaceful spot just yet. I pulled out my journal and a pencil, thinking I should capture this moment somehow. But as I sat there with the blank page in front of me, I realized that some things are maybe too perfect to put into words. How do you describe the exact shade of pink the sky turns just before sunrise, or the particular way the light dances on moving water, or the feeling of complete peace that comes from sharing a quiet moment with a wild deer? Instead, I found myself sketching the scene, the gentle curve of the stream, the trees on the far bank, the rocks scattered along the water's edge. My drawing skills ain't much to speak of, but there's something calming about trying to capture the lines and shapes of the natural world. Each stroke of the pencil felt deliberate and peaceful, like a form of meditation. A butterfly landed on the page while I was drawing, its wings a brilliant orange with black markings. It sat there for the longest time, as if it was examining my work. I held my breath, afraid to move and disturb it. The butterfly's wings opened and closed slowly, catching the sunlight like stained glass windows. Eventually it flew away, dancing through the air in that carefree way butterflies have, following some path known only to itself. By the time I made my way back up to camp, the sun was fully up and everyone was starting their day. Dutch was already dressed and discussing something with Hosea over coffee. Sadie was checking her guns, and I could see Pearson starting to prepare something for breakfast. The camp was coming alive with the familiar sounds of our peculiar family beginning another day. But I carried that peaceful morning with me throughout the day. Even when things got hectic, even when Dutch started talking about another job, or when Micah began stirring up trouble, I could close my eyes and remember the sound of that gentle stream, the grace of that deer, the simple beauty of sunrise painting the sky in colors I don't have names for. That's the thing about moments like these. They become like treasures you can carry in your mind. When the world gets too loud, too violent, too complicated, you can reach into that treasure chest of memories and pull out something pure and simple and good. That morning by the stream, it's become one of those treasures for me. I think that's why I'm writing it down now. Not because the words can truly capture what I experienced, but because the act of remembering it, of taking the time to think about each detail, makes it more real somehow. Makes it something I can hold on to when times get dark. As I finish writing this by lamplight, with the sounds of camp settling down for the night around me, I'm already looking forward to tomorrow morning. Maybe I'll wake early again. Maybe I'll find another quiet moment by that stream. Or maybe I'll discover some other small piece of beauty that this world has to offer. Either way, I'll try to pay attention. I'll try to notice the small miracles that happen every day, the ones we usually miss because we're too busy rushing toward whatever we think is important. Because mornings like this one remind me that sometimes the most important thing is simply being present, simply being awake to the gentle wonder that surrounds us every single day. The fire's burning low now, and I can hear the night sounds starting up. Crickets singing their evening songs, an owl calling from somewhere in the darkness. It's time for sleep, time to let this day go, and trust that tomorrow will bring its own quiet gifts. And maybe, if I'm lucky, I'll wake early enough to catch another sunrise, to witness another small miracle unfolding by that peaceful stream. The afternoon rain at Clemens Point today brought one of those summer afternoons that make you grateful to be alive, even when life's been handing you nothing but trouble. I was sitting under the awning by my tent at Clemens Point, watching the sky grow heavy with the promise of rain. The air had that thick, sweet quality it gets before a storm, when everything seems to hold its breath in anticipation. Our camp sits pretty near the water here, and I've grown fond of the way the light plays across Flatiron Lake throughout the day. This afternoon, the water was like glass, reflecting the darkening clouds so perfectly you could hardly tell where the sky ended and the lake began. A few birds were skimming low over the surface, their wingtips barely touching the water, creating tiny ripples that spread out in perfect circles. I'd been cleaning my guns, a task that I find oddly soothing when my mind needs settling. There's something about the routine of it, taking each piece apart, cleaning every component with care, oiling the metal until it gleams. My hands know the work so well, I don't have to think about it, which leaves my mind free to wander or simply rest in the repetitive motions. The first drops of rain started falling just as I finished reassembling my revolver. They were big, warm drops that made a soft patting sound on the canvas above my head and sent up little puffs of dust where they hit the dry ground. I could smell that distinctive scent that comes with the first rain after a dry spell. Something earthy and clean and full of life. Within minutes, the scattered drops had turned into a proper downpour. But it wasn't one of those violent storms that crash and rage and leave destruction in their wake. This was a gentle, steady rain that seemed to settle over everything, like a blessing. The sound it made was like music, a soft, constant rhythm on the tent canvas, the leaves, the surface of the lake. I moved my chair back a bit to stay dry, but kept the tent flap open so I could watch the rain fall. There's something mesmerizing about watching rain, the way each drop catches the light for just a moment before disappearing into the general wetness. The lake's surface, which had been so still and mirror-like, was now alive with countless tiny impacts, each one creating its own small splash and ring of ripples. Across the way, I could see John trying to get a tarp over some of our supplies, getting soaked in the process. He was cursing up a storm, naturally, but there was something almost comical about the way he kept slipping on the wet ground and fumbling with the ropes. Eventually, Abigail came out to help him, and even from a distance, I could tell she was both exasperated and amused by his struggles. The rain brought out different scents from everything around us. The grass, the trees, the wooden structures of our camp. Everything seemed to release its own particular fragrance when touched by the water. There was the green smell of wet vegetation, the earthy aroma of soil drinking in the moisture, and underneath it all, the clean, fresh scent of the rain itself. I noticed how the rain seemed to quiet everything else. The usual sounds of camp activity were muffled, replaced by the gentle hiss and patter of water falling on every surface. Even our horses seemed calmer, standing peacefully under whatever shelter they could find, occasionally shaking their manes to shed the water, but otherwise seeming content to wait out the shower. As I sat there watching, a memory came to me of being caught in the rain as a child. I couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old, and I'd been playing in the woods behind our house when a sudden summer shower had started. Instead of running for shelter like I'd been taught, I'd stood there in a clearing and tilted my face up to the sky, letting the warm rain wash over me. I remember how free I'd felt in that moment, how connected to something bigger than myself. The rain had plastered my hair to my head and soaked through my clothes, but I hadn't cared. I'd opened my mouth to taste the rainwater, clean and slightly sweet, and I'd laughed out loud at the pure joy of being alive in that moment. That child seems like a stranger to me now, sometimes. So much has happened since then, so many hard choices and harder consequences. But sitting there this afternoon, watching the rain fall on Flatiron Lake, I felt a little bit of that same wonder creeping back into my heart. A great blue heron appeared at the water's edge, moving with that slow, deliberate grace that makes you think they're ancient creatures with ancient wisdom. The birds seemed completely unbothered by the rain, standing motionless in the shallow water, waiting for some unwary fish to swim within striking distance. There was something almost meditative about watching the heron. The perfect stillness, the patience, the complete focus on the present moment. The rain began to ease up after about an hour, though it didn't stop entirely. It settled into a gentle drizzle that seemed like it might continue well into the evening. The air had cooled considerably and carried the fresh, clean smell of a world that had been washed and renewed. Everything looked brighter somehow, more vivid. The greens were greener, the browns richer, the colors of our camp more distinct. As the heavier rain moved on, other sounds began to emerge from beneath the constant pattering. I could hear frogs starting to sing from the marshy areas near the water, their voices creating a chorus that seemed to celebrate the moisture. Somewhere in the distance, a fish jumped, creating a splash that was different from the rain but somehow harmonious with it. Charles appeared from his tent, looking refreshed rather than bothered by the rain. He's always had a way of moving with the weather rather than fighting against it, accepting what comes and finding a way to be at peace with it. He nodded to me as he passed, heading down toward the water with his fishing gear. Smart man. Fish often bite better just after rain. I pulled out my journal and began writing, though I had to be careful to keep the pages dry. There was something about the combination of the gentle rain and the peaceful atmosphere that made me want to capture the moment in words. Not because anything particularly exciting had happened, but because sometimes the quiet moments are the ones most worth remembering. As I wrote, I became aware of all the different sounds the rain was making. The sharp patter on the metal coffee pot near Pearson's cooking area, the soft whisper as it fell on the grass, the gentle drumming on the wooden planks of our dock, the subtle splash as it joined the lake water. Each surface created its own unique note in the rain's symphony. The light was beginning to change as the afternoon wore on. What had been a gray, overcast sky was starting to show patches of brightness where the sun was trying to break through. These breaks in the clouds created shafts of light that illuminated the falling rain, turning the drops into thousands of tiny diamonds suspended in the air. I found myself thinking about how rain connects everything. The same water that was falling on our camp was falling on towns and cities and wilderness areas for miles around. It was filling streams and rivers, nourishing crops and forests, providing drink for wild animals and livestock alike. There was something comforting about being part of that larger cycle, that endless movement of water from sky to earth and back again. A small rabbit ventured out from under some nearby bushes, apparently deciding the rain wasn't heavy enough to keep it from foraging. It moved carefully, stopping frequently to listen and look around, its fur darkened and spiked from the moisture. There was something endearing about the way it would pause to shake water droplets from its ears, then continue on with its business as if the rain was just a minor inconvenience. By evening, the rain had mostly stopped, leaving behind a world that felt washed clean and new. The air was cooler and filled with the rich scents of wet earth and growing things. Our camp had taken on a peaceful quality, with people moving more slowly and speaking more quietly, as if the rain had reminded us all to appreciate the gentler moments in life. As I finish writing this entry by the soft light of a lamp, I can still hear the occasional drip of water falling from the trees and the tent canvas. The frogs are singing their evening songs, and somewhere out on the lake I can hear the gentle splash of what might be Charles catching our dinner. Days like this remind me that peace isn't always something you have to chase after or fight for. Sometimes it just falls from the sky like rain, gentle and persistent and life-giving. You just have to be willing to sit still long enough to let it wash over you, to let it clean away the dust and worry, and remind you of what really matters. The rain has moved on now, but it's left something behind. A sense of renewal, of possibility, of the world being fresh and full of quiet wonders. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's everything. The Sunrise Hunt. Near Valentine. The morning mist was still hanging low over the heartlands when I set out before dawn today, my breath visible in the cool air as I made my way through the tall grass toward a spot I'd been watching for several days. There's something special about being out in the wild when the world is just beginning to wake up, when you're moving through a landscape that belongs more to the animals than to people. I'd been tracking a particular buck for the better part of a week, not because we desperately needed the meat, though Pearson never complains about fresh venison, but because there was something about this animal that had captured my attention. He was a magnificent creature, with antlers that spread wide and strong, and a way of moving through the forest that spoke of wisdom earned through many seasons. The horse and I had left camp while most everyone was still sleeping, making our way through the pre-dawn darkness by the light of a moon that was just beginning to fade. My girl knows this work well, moving quietly and surely, even when the light is dim. There's a partnership between a man and his horse when you're hunting together, an understanding that goes deeper than words. As we made our way toward the spot where I'd last seen the buck, the eastern sky began to show the first hints of color. It started as just the faintest lightening of the darkness, a suggestion that somewhere beyond the horizon the sun was preparing to make its appearance. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the scents of grass and earth, and the faint musk of wild animals that had passed this way during the night. I dismounted about a quarter-mile from where I intended to wait, leaving my horse ground-tied near a small stream where she could drink if she needed to. The walking would do me good anyway, help me get into the proper frame of mind for what I hoped would unfold. Hunting, real hunting, isn't about the killing. It's about becoming part of the natural world, about moving and thinking like the animals you're pursuing. The spot I'd chosen was a small rise that gave me a good view of a meadow where deer often came to graze in the early morning. There was a fallen log that provided both cover and a comfortable place to sit, and the wind was favorable, carrying my scent away from where I expected the deer to appear. I settled in just as the sky began to brighten in earnest. This is the part of hunting that most people don't understand. The waiting. You have to become completely still, not just in your body, but in your mind as well. You have to let go of all the thoughts and worries that usually occupy your attention and become fully present in the moment. It's a kind of meditation, a way of connecting with something older and deeper than the complexities of human life. As I sat there in the growing light, the forest around me began to come alive. First, it was just the birds, a few tentative chirps that gradually grew into a full chorus as the sun climbed higher. Each species had its own voice, its own contribution to the morning symphony. Cardinals with their clear, sweet whistles, chickadees with their cheerful chatter, the harsh call of a blue jay somewhere in the distance. Then came the rustle of small creatures moving through the underbrush, squirrels beginning their endless search for food, chipmunks scurrying about their morning business, the soft patter of rabbit feet on fallen leaves. The forest was waking up all around me, and by staying perfectly still, I was being allowed to witness this daily miracle. The sun finally crested the horizon, sending long shafts of golden light through the trees and across the meadow. The light transformed everything it touched, turning ordinary grass into something that seemed to glow from within, making spider webs visible as intricate works of art decorated with dewdrops. There's something about early morning light that makes the world look newly created, fresh and full of possibility. That's when I saw him, the buck I'd been tracking. He stepped into the far edge of the meadow with that careful grace that speaks of a lifetime spent balancing wariness with the need to feed. His antlers caught the morning light, and I could see the power in his muscular frame, the alertness in every line of his body. He was everything I remembered and more. A creature perfectly adapted to his world, confident but never careless. I raised my rifle slowly, taking care not to make any sudden movements that might catch his attention. But as I watched him through the scope, something changed in my thinking. Here was an animal in his prime, living exactly as nature intended. He had a mate, probably offspring, a place in the complex web of life that stretched across these mountains and plains. Did I really need to end that life? Miss Grimshaw emerged from her tent and joined our circle, settling into a chair with a sigh that spoke of a long day's work. But even she seemed to soften in the firelight, her usual stern demeanor relaxing into something more maternal. She listened to the stories with a slight smile, occasionally shaking her head at some tale of the men's past adventures. Uncle, surprisingly, wasn't holding court with one of his rambling stories tonight. Instead, he sat quietly strumming his banjo, playing soft melodies that seemed to match the mood of the evening. His music was gentle and contemplative, weaving in and out of the conversation without overwhelming it. The notes seemed to dance with the flames, rising and falling with their movement. I found myself studying the faces around the fire, thinking about how different everyone looked in this warm golden light. The harsh edges that daylight revealed were softened, making everyone appear younger, more peaceful. The fire has a way of revealing the essential humanity in people, stripping away pretenses and showing the souls beneath. Mary Beth had brought out some sewing, but she'd set it aside and was instead gazing into the flames with a dreamy expression. I could almost see stories forming in her mind, tales inspired by the dancing shadows and flickering light. She has a writer's eyes, always seeing possibilities, always finding material in the simplest moments. As the fire burned lower, Charles added another log, sending up a small shower of sparks that rose into the night sky like tiny stars. The sparks drifted upward, glowing orange against the darkness before fading away. There was something magical about watching them rise and disappear, like wishes being carried up to heaven. The conversation had turned to childhood memories, each person sharing fragments of their past. Simple things, mostly. Favorite foods their mothers used to make, games they played as children, places they'd loved to explore. These stories were different from Dutch's grand adventures or the tales of jobs and close calls that we usually tell. They were gentler, more personal, windows into the people we'd all been before life hardened us. The sun climbed higher, and the quality of light began to change from that magical golden glow to the clearer, whiter light of full morning. The mist that had been hanging over the meadow started to lift, revealing details that had been hidden in the softer light. Wildflowers scattered throughout the grass, a small creek winding along one edge of the clearing, the complex patterns of light and shadow created by the surrounding trees. I realized I'd been sitting there for over an hour, completely absorbed in watching this family of deer go about their morning routine. My rifle was still ready, and I could have taken my shot at any point, but something had shifted in my thinking. Instead of seeing prey, I was seeing fellow creatures sharing the same morning, the same world, the same simple desire to find food and safety and companionship. The buck seemed to sense something finally, Perhaps my scent had shifted with the changing breeze, or maybe he just possessed that sixth sense that keeps wild animals alive. He raised his head and looked directly toward my hiding spot. For a moment, our eyes met across the meadow, and I felt a connection that was both humbling and profound. Here was intelligence looking back at me, awareness recognizing awareness. He didn't bolt immediately. Instead, he took a step toward the forest, then stopped and looked back, as if making sure his family was following. The does and the yearling moved with him, and within moments they had melted back into the trees with that ghostly quiet that deer possess. One moment they were there, the next they had simply vanished, leaving only the empty meadow and the memory of their presence. I lowered my rifle and sat back against the log, feeling something I couldn't quite name. It wasn't disappointment at missing my chance for a kill. It was something more complex, a sense of having witnessed something sacred, of having been granted a glimpse into a world that operates by different rules than the one I usually inhabit. The hunt had been successful, just not in the way I'd expected when I set out that morning. The walk back to my horse gave me time to think about what had happened. I'd gone out intending to take a life, and instead I'd been given a reminder of how precious life is, how complex and beautiful the natural world can be when we take the time to really observe it. The buck would live another day, would continue to play his role in the endless cycle of seasons and generations that keeps the wild places alive. My horse greeted me with a soft whimper, and I spent a few minutes with her, scratching behind her ears and talking quietly about what we'd seen. Horses understand more than people give them credit for, and she seemed to sense that something meaningful had occurred during our morning's work. We made our way back toward camp at an easy pace, both of us content with the way things had turned out. As I write this now, with the sounds of camp life going on around me, I keep thinking about that moment when the buck looked directly at me. There was recognition there, an acknowledgement between two living beings sharing the same moment in time. It reminded me that we're all part of something larger than ourselves, all connected in ways we don't always understand or appreciate. The morning hunt had taught me something about patience, about the value of simply being present in the natural world. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from taking something, but from knowing when to leave it alone. That buck will continue to roam these hills, and maybe someday I'll see him again. But if I do, I think I'll be content just to watch, to be reminded once more of the wild beauty that still exists in this world, if we're wise enough to preserve it. There's something to be said for coming home empty-handed sometimes. It means the world is still full of life, still full of mysteries and wonders that can't be possessed, only witnessed. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's everything.